lovely bookish friends, and welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be having a look at some great classic books to read this autumn and this spooky season. Now I am just going to apologise in advance for my voice. I am recovering from a really bad cold, and so my voice sounds a bit funny. I also have a bit of a cough, but hopefully that won't be in this video. It's actually why I ended up this video was meant to air last week on last Friday, but I uploaded another dance video instead because I wasn't able to do the voiceover properly because my voice was awful, and it still doesn't sound that great, but please bear with me. Okay, yes, so I have a really nice collection of classic books which are great for this time of year. There are two that I do not own physical copies of, so I'm going to begin with one of those and then end with the other one. And the first one on that list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now this follows the story of Dorian Gray, who is having his portrait done, and he realises that he's never going to be as beautiful as the day when this portrait was taken. Like this day, every day afterwards he's going to start aging, and he'll never be as beautiful then as in this moment when this picture is doing. So he sort of makes, I suppose you would say, like a wish or claim, whatever, that he would love to like sell his soul that if the portrait could be age instead of him, and that he could forever be this beautiful and this handsome, and the portrait could be, you know, the ugly one. And this ends up coming true, and so the portrait starts aging and becomes this physical, evidence, if you like, of Dorian's sins and everything that happens to him whilst he remains beautiful, and that's kind of how the story goes on from there. And so this is a really kind of eerie book for this time of year. It's not that long, and Oscar Wilde is just a great writer. He has some great prose. He is just someone whose work I think everyone should read at least one or two pieces of his work. He is brilliant. And so yes, it's a very more on the eerie side rather than on the spooky side, but I think it's definitely a great classic. So next up we have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now this follows the story of Jane Eyre, and it begins with her as an unloved orphan living with her aunt, and then we see her go to this boarding school, and then later becoming a governess. And she becomes a governess to the ward of a Mr Rochester, who lives in this sort of remote manor house called Thornfield Hall. But as Jane starts to work there and live there, she starts to realise that there's something a bit odd with the manor, and she starts hearing this weird laugh, and there are other noises and fires that are set by mysterious people. And it's just, yes, I think that's a very basic synopsis of this one without going into too much detail and giving much away. I feel like a lot of people already know the plot roughly for Jane Eyre because it is really popular. However, this book is definitely on the eerie side for classics. It's a very gothic novel. It takes a little bit to get into. I will just say that if you're reading it for the first time, because you do begin with a young Jane, and the first few chapters do follow young Jane. But once you get into the adult Jane and she gets to Thornfield, that's when the kind of eerie side starts to happen and the gothic elements begin, and it is a great read for this time of year. Next we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now this follows the story of Dr. Jekyll, who is this kind, well-respected and intelligent scientist who meddles in the darker side of science and wants to bring out his second nature. He does this by transforming himself into Mr. Hyde, his evil alter ego, who doesn't repent or accept responsibility for his evil crimes and ways. So this is sort of a split personality disorder kind of story. However, there's a bit more of a science fiction element to it, and this is, it's creepy. It's probably on the more creepy side, and it is such a classic book. We have I think in a lot of popular culture we see elements of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, but this is the original, and it is a really good book that I've only just recently read and I really have enjoyed it, so please check it out. Next up we have one that is a little bit more softer on the kind of speary, creepy side. It is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Now this follows the story of Catherine, who loves Gothic novels. She is very much obsessed with them. She loves reading about them and everything like that. She's all into the kind of books that we now call like almost come before a lot of the books that we call classics. She absolutely loves them, and she ends up becoming friends with a Henry Tildy and getting to know his family, and she ends up staying with them at their manor. But when she's there, her imagination gets away with her a little bit. Let's just leave it at that. This is definitely, it has some great kind of gothic vibes, but it's not really a horror or a spooky story in any way, but it is good fun, and it sort of pokes a little bit of fun at that kind of gothic elements and the classic horror, so it is a lot of fun and a great read. Next we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now this book tells the story of Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who is this gifted scientist who wants to create his own living creation, his own being. However, when the being comes to life, it's not quite the perfect specimen that he imagines, and this sets off a series of events with him and his creation, his creature, and it leads to some rather tragic kind of circumstances. I don't want to get too much into it, but the very basic idea is that Dr. Frankenstein creates the monster. Yes, Frankenstein is not the monster, it is the creator is called Frankenstein. It is a classic in all sense of the words, and it is such a great, both creepy and eerie, and just such a great story, and it's fastly paced. I really highly recommend checking this one out. It's not actually too difficult of a read. Of course it is the classic language, but because it is shorter, it is an easier read compared to a lot of other classics. Next up we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now this book actually has a number of different protagonists, and it follows it's told through different journals and letters between these protagonists, but it begins with Jonathan Harker, who is a young lawyer, and he travels to Castle Dracula in Eastern Europe to meet with a client, this nobleman called Count Dracula. However, as Harker arrives in the area, the peasants and everyone try to warn him off his destination, giving him crucifixes and charms against evil, and keep uttering this strange word that Harker later translates into vampire. And that's the very basic synopsis of this one. It is, I feel like a lot of people know the character Dracula, but not many people perhaps know the story, and it is so good. It is another one that is fastly paced. It is told, like I said, through journal articles and letters between the characters. Journal articles, I mean, like, yeah, like diary entries and letters between the characters. So that is one way that I think you're gonna when people read it, it sometimes takes a little bit to get into, because of this differing main characters and differing styles in storytelling. But honestly, this is such a good book, and it is genuinely quite creepy. It does kind of give you chills, and it is such a, I keep using the words like classic horror because they're all classics, but it is genuinely such a great story, and it's creepy. It's kind of leaves you going, what is going on? It is such a good book. Last up, we have The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. Now this is a truly creepy story. It follows this up-and-coming London lawyer called Arthur Gibbs, who goes off to this faraway town for a funeral and to settle the affairs of his client. But when he gets there, what should have been this routine business trip turns into this horrifying haunting when he is haunted by mysterious sounds such as this pony and trap noise when there isn't any, a moving rocking chair, and worst of all, this woman dressed in all black. Now this, like I said, is definitely creepy. This is a proper horror gothic classic. It's not actually that long, to be honest, as a book, but it is one that really does give you the chills. It is different, I will say, from the movie version with Daniel Radcliffe, and I mean that does quite a good job of setting the kind of the scene of where it is and everything like that, but the actual storylines are quite different, and it is honestly just, oh, it gives you the chills. It is a great one to read this spooky season, and like I said, it actually isn't that long, so it's quite a good one to try and fit into your TBR. And yes, that brings us to the end of all these books. Now these are probably a lot of classics you already know and probably ones you've already read, but I just honestly, there's something wonderful about these books, especially when you consider, like, at the time they were written, even Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde, these are all books that for us, these characters are quite popular media characters, if that makes sense. Like, you see cartoony versions of them in different TV shows, like even in like stuff like the Looney Tunes and Scooby-Doo, you see these characters who are sort of, you know, Frankenstein's monster, or have like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of situation. And even Dracula is one that we see again and again. But when you read these originals, there's just something, even though they probably are quite hard for some people to read, there's just something really magical about them, knowing that these are the originals, where these ideas that we see so often come from. And I always can't help but wonder what people at the time would have thought when they first read these books. Like, reading Frankenstein for the first time without like the big genres of sci-fi and fantasy and, you know, the TV shows and films that we have, where we're kind of used to these weird ideas, to read that book for the first time must have been crazy back in Victorian times, and just all of them, to be honest, must have been such a weird experience reading these books for the first time. And you know, all the writers probably coming up with these books for the first time. I do think they are great reads, and also I do always recommend that if you're someone who wants to read classics but struggles a bit with the language and stuff like that, for ones such as Jane Eyre and Northanger Abbey, I always recommend watching the films first, so then you get like a rough idea about how the language is used, what it actually means, and then maybe read the book, because that's sometimes easier. Or listen to the audiobook. There's some really good audiobook adaptations of a lot of these books. In fact, I'm currently listening to, let me get it up so I get all the names right, on Audible. I'm currently listening to this collection, which is literally called the Monster Collection, and it has Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, and Jekyll and Hyde, and Dracula, and they're all brilliant narrators. I highly recommend checking that one out if you are wanting to read classics but you're not into it. I do highly recommend giving those a go, because they make it so much easier to take in these classic words and classic language. So that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for putting up with my voice if you've made it all this far. If you have liked this video, please like and subscribe, and check out some of my other videos. I have another non-classic recommendation video for books to read this autumn, and lots of other bookish content to come. So, until next time, my lovely bookish friends, bye!